In fact, it was better than going to church. And, we joked about it, but we were also very serious about it. What's at the center of it is a word I like to use when I'm teaching literature and poetry is play. A simple word. It's about play. It's not about who's scoring the most goals. In fact, we barely know who's winning the game.
Okay, welcome. This is episode number 3 of our podcast titled PlayOn, Why Street Soccer. I'm John Henderson, sidekick and co-host with Neil Levin, our nation's leading advocate for street soccer. And today we have the privilege of hosting Mark Yakich, footballer, painter, poet, and author of the fantastic book simply titled Football, published in early 2022. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks, Johnny. I'm both excited and I'm a little tense, too, about having Mark on because of how we met and the things that have transpired since. So I'm looking to play some pickup on my many visits down to New Orleans recently and find Mark online posting about their weekly pickup game. And I'm like, hey, can I come out and play? And he's, oh, yeah, come on. And, the time and all that and gather. And it's like 3v3 at first. But then I'm out there finding myself opposed to Mark on the teams. And I got to defend this guy. And, oh, my gosh, this guy got game and skill. Guy can move a ball. So I'm flashing back to that. And I want to get out and play. But I got to tell you, Mark, I'm stoked to have you here. Mark is the Gregory Curtin Distinguished Professor of English and I believe poetry at Loyola University, New Orleans. And I can't exemplify enough the beauty of this game of street soccer that brought us together and allowed me to meet a guy like Mark, even having to defend him out on the pitch. But just an amazing guy who wrote this incredible book with essay after essay on the culture of football and then street soccer and something that they play out there as three-touch. Mark, tell us about three-touch.
Thank you, Neil, for that intro. I remember that day we met very well because it was under the lights because it's hard to find a pitch in New Orleans or a spot when daylight savings time does whatever it does in the fall. And so, we're playing under like a couple of like big bright lights and trying to defend each other. And that must have been like a 5-on-5, 6-on-6 game. And in fact, it was what you just said. It was a 3-touch game. So this whole 3-touch started because of the pandemic. I've been playing years here in New Orleans, a game on Sunday mornings, a pickup game. I've been playing it for about 10 years, but the game had been actually going on for 20, 25 years. Some of the guys have been playing for that long. And they started when they were very young and having barbecues and stuff. And a lot of us are middle-aged now, but there'll still be plenty of 20-year-olds, college kids, even some preteens. Anyway, that was on Sunday, and then the pandemic hit and stopped everything. It was illegal to have any kind of organized sports in New Orleans, like most places. But one day, 3 weeks into the pandemic, I saw a couple of my friends. I was taking a run in the Audubon Park here, and I saw my friends putting up the pop-up goals we normally have. And I was like, wait a second, are we actually going to do this? They're like, yeah, we did it last week. There's 2 rules. One is 6 feet from each other, the social distancing, and then 3 touches. You only get 3 touches on the ball. I was like, 3 touches. Yeah, so you can, not a lot of dribbling. You have to pass the ball or take a shot on goal. And that first game was only 4 of us. It was 2-on-2. And it was in April, and it was hot already. And we played for an hour and a half. And we hadn't played for 3 weeks, so it was glorious. We were all so excited, 4 of us. What ended up happening then in the following weeks is more people joined, a lot of the old players, but some people who were just happened to be in Audubon Park walking around, and they saw us and they came over. Can we play? Of course you can play. So we started it, but we had to give them that one rule. There's still the 6 feet and 3-touch. 6 feet went away after the first few months. 3-touch stayed, and it just changed. It changed how we all played. One of the things it really did was make us play more cohesively, make us support each other in lots of ways. So it wasn't just that you couldn't dribble. It was that if you had the ball, everyone knew you only had a couple more touches on the ball. You had your first one trapped, which became super important, the first touch, more so than we'd ever thought about before, even though we'd seen it in the pros. But also then you knew that, oh my gosh, he's got no one to go to on the line or behind him or square. So you had to get in position. So you always knew when you had the ball, there'd be someone in support too. And it just changed. It did those tiki-taka, whatever you want to call it. It started to people in triangles. You defended differently too, which was interesting. And so that game ended up being more than just once a week. We ended up starting playing it 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursdays, and Sunday mornings, the original game. And we still are playing up until about literally a month ago. It was just 3-touch, and now things have changed some, and I'm not entirely happy about
it. How so?
Well, the 3-touch rule, while it was great, the overall notion in our bigger culture is that things are going back to normal or to how they should be or should have been, in quotes. And so some of the guys, especially guys who are very good dribblers, did miss the dribble sufficiently that we're back to mostly what is called sometimes unlimited touch or infinite touch. One of the guys called it. I think it's really funny, but so it has changed. The one thing is, though, I have to say, we're all so much better players now because of 2.5 years of playing that style.
Well, I mean, that itself seems a bit of a metaphor to me. One of my favorite lines that you just said was, of course you can play. And it reminds me of a coach who once said that the play lot rule is where you can't say that you can't play. And it seemed that during the pandemic, what you were really getting was, while you were getting skill, that was more a byproduct of this idea of, welcome, come, join. And while I sense your frustration over, the change of the game back to the bigger field type concept and or prima donna play or what have you, it seems that it still is focused on the idea of bring people together, because that's what I experienced when I was there. So there were several different languages spoken. There were several different ethnicities. There was many different age groups. It's a broad range of ages and gender. And so, yeah, I'm stuck on this line of yours. I love it. Of course, you can play. So to that end, and relative to your book, how do you see football functioning as that lens through which so many of us view our daily lives?
Yeah. I played for 10 years that Sunday game, and we always joked, a bunch of the guys, we joked that it was church. In fact, it was better than going to church. And, we joked about it, but we were also very serious about it, because that's the thing about it. What's at the center of it is a word I like to use when I'm teaching literature and poetry is play. A simple word. It's about play. It's not about who's scoring the most goals. In fact, we barely know who's winning the game usually. Like someone scores a goal. What is that? 4-3? It's really not ever an issue. Almost never, which is amazing because, like you just said, over this couple of years, we've gathered more players. So now, sometimes on a Sunday morning, there'll be 30 people out there. And so we have to break it off into a couple different games because get 15 on 15, 16 on 16, it becomes too much. But it's always about, the center of it's always about play, which ties into, of course you can, because who am I or anyone to deny another person play?
Yeah, that's to me that I just melt when I hear that, because I feel that's missing so much in what we do on a daily basis currently, especially for our kids. I was just hearing a story about a guy, a dad who has a daily wiffle ball game in his yard, and everyone from the neighborhood just comes over and plays, right? When I certainly grew up with the idea of, walking out your front door and meeting your friends right on the block and going down and building ramps to jump with your bike or playing stickball or stuff like that. But it doesn't seem like that really happens a lot these days. But much more, I'm going to come back to that in a second. You grew up in the system. You played some pretty high-level ball in a heavily coached, heavily structured system, played at top levels. So what do you see as the biggest differences between how you grew up playing in that system and this concept of, small-sided pickup?
Yeah, it's a question we don't think about very often because you're just doing it now that I'm older. But I guess back when I was younger, so growing up outside Chicago and the suburbs and all that, when soccer was just starting to take influence, I think a lot of the moms and dads didn't know the game, so they wanted some structure around it. That was maybe one of the things. It didn't grow up organically from just kids kicking a ball around. That was maybe American football or baseball, throwing the ball with your dad in the back. That was more organic. I'd pitch to my dad. hours, made him, crouch down and pitch a baseball just because I like to throw the ball and try and get a strike. That was just pure play. I would, against the parallel of baseball or the not parallel, I had this fort in my backyard, and I took off the roof of it and I put it against the house with aluminum siding, and I would just go in the backyard and throw the ball to a little thing I painted on there, and my parents would come home and see 5,000 dents in the aluminum siding. But it was pure play. It was just me and no one else throwing a baseball against this piece of wood. Well, soccer didn't have that. So it was structured through youth organizations, which was fine. And since it was kind of foreign, or distinctly foreign, none of our parents grew up playing it. They wanted some kind of authority to say, this is how it goes, and to give it structure. And I think when looking back on it, I think it grew out of that. I became, I played in the youth leagues, and then I played on a traveling team for a year or two when I was probably 13 or 14. Funny enough, our high school didn't have soccer my freshman year, so I ended up running cross country in high school. Then they got soccer as a club sport. And then in college I played, Division III, but I did play. And then even then it was such a funny cut and paste job. Like our first coach had never played soccer either, but he was a fitness guy. So a lot of the structure was around just getting a lot of endurance. And that was fine, but it was all very structured. And the other thing that wasn't free about it was, well, I don't know how to put this. I guess it goes with lots of team sports, but on the pitch with dynamic of different players and the hot shots and the prima donnas and the quiet kids and things, that was always pretty rough in soccer for some reason. Like I found it more difficult to navigate that than in baseball or cross country. And I'm not sure why that is, honestly. But now, it's just because I'm older, but the more freestyle of not a lot of structure in terms of anyone telling you what you do, but we make our own rules, whether it's, the 3-touch or, about having no corners, that kind of thing, or how big the goals are going to be. Some pop-up goals are big, some are small. And we worked that out, actually, because some guys want a bigger one, some want a smaller one. But it's all up to us, the players. It's in our control, which is totally a different idea than what I grew up with.
Well, oh my God, so many things come up with me on that one, including self-expression. Self-expression is very empowering. And I think what you're saying is that in a structured environment, it's much more difficult to have self-expression, right? You're trying to do what your coach wants you to do. And there's, that's all the talk right now, is that we're creating robots in the soccer world, right? Robots that respond to the inputs of the coaches and the parents and the leagues. You relate back to the time when, the parents didn't know soccer, and so they wanted it coached, they wanted it structured. But what rings in me is fear, right? We start in fear. Like this is a sport that came to us. We had to buy into it with a lot of money to get it going. We threw a lot of money at it. And we didn't do those things that you said you did with a ball and playing out back and tossing around and being able to take ownership of your play. And I think that's really the big piece. We've been saying that for a long time here at Metal, is that we have to give ownership of the culture of soccer to the people. We have stripped the people, certainly the ones that are in the soccer development structure, and that's everything from AYSO to the men's national team and women's national team. We've stripped them of the ability to self-express. And we figured, well, if we throw enough money at it, we'll be good at it. But that you can't throw money at that kind of empowerment. You can't throw money at that kind of self-expression. And I'm thinking further, I'm wondering how many games Messie's parents went to for the first 13 years of his life when he's playing every day in the streets. The assumption is 0. I saw that anecdotally somewhere. And, that is a great illustration that we got, parents of 3-year-olds pacing the sideline, yelling at referees now in our system. And that elevates everybody up to believe that that's what you have to do in the system in order to really play soccer well. What about enjoying soccer? What about the concept of play? Yeah. And you even talk about that. You talk about Cooper's version of protecting childhood through play in chapter 23 of your book. Just fabulous stuff. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I guess that ties in nice. And what you just said makes me think of a few things is, a lot of this has to do with ideas of winning, but also a lot of things that are being imposed on lots of places in the system, not just in soccer, but in our society in general. Thinking about the word assessment. In university, it's the same thing. We have to assess everything. This isn't just in soccer. This is in sports, music, university and college life. It has to be assessment. There have to be learning outcomes. Well, I don't know how many learning outcomes there are in a pickup game that you can quantify, right? A lot of this has to do with qualifying things, which you can't, put your big data crunching on. The group you mentioned is Children's Football Alliance in the UK, and what their main mission is to do is just give the game back to kids. No adults give any rules. The kids make up all their rules, pick their own teams. The adults do nothing, literally, besides just drive the kid there or just try and organize, get some balls or something. And the kids, it's sheer play. So sometimes they make up their own games with the cones. They're not even shooting at goals. They're just trying to knock down orange cones, and that's the game. Let's knock down the orange cones, right? I mean, it's kind of funny. I'm teaching a class on soccer and culture this semester at Loyola here in New Orleans with my colleague who grew up in Guatemala. And he, has different perspective growing up in Guatemala, of course, for lots of reasons. One is that he also is a scholar on Quiche and the Popol Vuh and indigenous peoples of Guatemala. So one of the things that has popped up, thinking about the game historically, not just in Maya games or in China or Japan and different cultures. Egypt had lots of ball games, a lot of them with their feet or hips. But even in the UK at the beginning of more organized football, right? All these different, what we call private schools, but public schools in the UK, Eton and stuff, they have their own version of the game that the boys made up themselves. And some of them you could actually hack. That was one of the key things. You could hack people in the shins. That was part of the game. That was legit. Other schools forbade that. But it was the boys who actually, it was organic.
Love it. Lee Taft is doing some great work in youth sports, and he's a big advocate for returning the game. And we just chimed in and said, we need to return youth sports and activities to our youth. We've taken it away from our youth. We've made it all about the parents. We've made it all about money. We've made it all about winning. It's absolutely on its head. And I love your discussion of assessment. I'm walking the beach the other day, and there's 6 volleyball courts sitting there on the beach early in the morning. Of course, no one's up at 6 using volleyball courts, but I'm struck by these giant signs of rules. What rules are there to street volleyball, to beach volleyball, right? You're walking the beach. If you got a ball, play volleyball. What rules? Right. There's a rule. What's that song? Signs, ever heard the signs? It gets me crazier than having to defend you. And that's a lot. So yeah, man, you're preaching to the choir here at Metal. It's all about the play. People are so struck by the idea that when we drop our street soccer courts in these urban centers, that there's no rule, there's no coach, there's no sign up, there's no registration, there's nothing. Just play. We went to one park where it was so foreign. The park supervisor said, we need to tell them that it's for them.
Wow.
And that they can just come in and play. So we made this giant banner that says, this is for you. Just come and play.
They need that reminder. Yeah.
Stunning that we need that reminder, right? I mean, yeah, it's okay. Get me going. We need Sazeracs for everyone, and we need 3 more hours at least to do this. But I know we're low on time, so I can't even get a Sazerac. Oh my gosh, what's it take to get a Sazerac around here? Look, we've been told by people outside, and I think this kind of is the umbrella of what we're talking about here. We've been told for years, I know I was, foreign-borns come to us and say that soccer is a culture, not a sport, and we don't understand it. And lo and behold, we've never been good at it internationally. And there's some reasons why the women have, because we invented women's soccer at the national level. But that's another topic. But what is it? I think Rodolfo, you quote Rodolfo in your book, you tell some stories about that and how he describes this concept of the culture of the sport. So talk to me about that. Yeah,
Rodolfo's great. So he's one of my best friends here in New Orleans. I only met him 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. He's from Mozambique originally. He's 20 years younger than me. So he's 32. So he came to the States when he was probably 26, first to Boston, then to New Orleans. And he grew up playing soccer because it was what you did, right? But he he told me, at some point after playing with me for a while, maybe a few months, so we met through soccer and chess, but mainly through soccer. He said, I didn't really like the game growing up. It wasn't my thing. Like he was into music and making music and just, other things, right? Lots of things going on when he was a kid. But the older as he gotten, it's kind of come back for him. And I think part of it is the culture of it. It's not just the game, or the two are enmeshed. I mean, we act like these are, you have soccer over here and you have culture over here, when they're completely concentric or they're superimposed on each other, intertwined. So what I mean is, what Rodolfo recognized right away and coming out and playing these pickup games on Sundays, because he only plays usually on the Sundays, he didn't do the weekly games, is that it wasn't just about kicking the ball around and scoring the goal or whatever, making a nice play even. It was about the relationships we had with each other. Even when we rarely talk that much before a game. It's like 5 minutes maybe. How you doing? How was your week? We don't know. We barely know what each other do for a living and don't know each other's last names for the most part. But something about that the experience together on the pitch was the culture. The game itself is the culture. You can tell a lot, and everyone knows this from playing sports, but especially soccer, perhaps because of its fluidness or because of the international diverse quality, you can tell a lot about a person by how they play with each other or against someone on a pitch. And Galliano has this great quote about that, right? About, show me how you play and I'll tell you who you are. And I knew that as a kid, and the older I've gotten, it's just gotten more underscored, that notion.
So true. Someone was just telling me they went out and watched a women's college game, and they were telling me, how great the game was. And I said, what did you see in the game that was so great? And so much of it was based on the power and the muscle and the, driving it in. And I don't think we're seeing people as who they are because we don't give them a chance to be who they are. And street soccer does that. Oh my gosh. So, anecdotally over my shoulder here, you're watching me on Zoom. There's this pickup game that occurred at one of the street soccer pitches that we dropped in McKinley Park in Chicago. And these 4 guys in their 30s are kicking the ball around on the big field a little bit, practicing their shots on the big 24-foot goal. And then these 4 kids come up, maybe 13, 14 years old, and jump into the 3v3 pitch. And the 4 older guys come over and say, hey, you guys want to play 4v4? And this was all in Spanish. They're all Latinx. And they're like, yeah. And the game that ensued, and the friendships, I mean, at first they were kind of standoffish, almost like gang-like. I mean, they were, this is their turf. And I asked them afterwards, would this ever have occurred if it was just some big giant field or even a beautiful turfed full-size field? They says, no, what usually happens is we compartmentalize. This group goes over there, this group goes over there, we play our things. We would never ask each other to play together. It says there's something inviting about a street soccer pitch, that place that you go that becomes your own little arena. And they shared that space for an hour and became friends and played like there was no tomorrow. And so that the relationships that you mentioned and that Rodolfo mentioned, wow, I mean, so compelling. So do you think really, I mean, let's go all out here. Do you think that embracing the culture of soccer can really be a metaphor for how we can embrace each other in society?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You just hit something on the head. And sometimes we actually talk about this. Some of my friends, soccer friends, or what I call it, I see and talk, meaning, and this came up just on Sunday, I think, after the game, with one of my friends who's an anthropology professor at Tulane. He said, how can you get an undocumented construction worker and a judge and a college student and a plumber all in the same place? We're totally different. This town, New Orleans, is very lots of disparity, right?
Yeah.
As most cities in the United States and elsewhere. But we're all there playing the same game. Everyone's, how do you want to put it, equal? I mean, there's no like hierarchy on the pitch and helping each other against each other. But I don't see that anywhere else. I don't see it anywhere else. At university, it's not there. In my daily life, my kids' sports, it's not there, organized sports. And that's a legit, I think, because it's the street, because it's pickup, it can happen there. That's one of the only places I see it.
the only place I've ever seen it. And I keep pinching myself and I keep looking and looking and looking. And we've been saying this for several years now at Metal Sports. There's no other activity or sport that has the capacity to do this. And I think that's why it's the beautiful game, as Pele said. It's in its simplicity, and it's not beautiful like, when you get the perfect 11v11 and you're watching a fabulous hour-and-a-half match, and it's beautiful in all those pieces of it, the connectivity, the beauty of watching great play. And you even talk about that in I think, was it chapter 13 of the book, the beauty of the pretty move, or really talking about that one move that you throw out in the street soccer court that you may never even try in front of a coach, because for fear of the backlash you might get for taking too much risk. But it's all of those things, and I've never seen it. And I wish I could claim having invented it, but boy, does our country need it. We need that connectivity.
And especially the more we go on with the assessment and the drive for always more and more and more, even with good intentions, that more attitude, which is about winning ultimately and gaining power, is really a divisive, splitting, not very community-oriented endeavor.
Brutal. It really is. It is a metaphor for our society, for sure. And didn't need to go much further than local boys high school game the other day, and a father of one of the players who stood by himself up in the stands, stood the entire game with no one else around him, and just barked the entire game, yelling at the refs, even blowing, making a whistle sound when he thought it should have been called offside, and booing the ref, and chastising the other players, chastising his own team's players, his own kid. Yeah. And what have we done? What have we, and why? What's his objective? I mean, we really need to pare that down. What is his objective in doing this? And what is it that he's relying on his son to show society about himself?
Right? Is that what it is? I mean, there's all kinds of things, psychological things, right? Is that about him living out a dream he never had? Is that about something at work that's getting reprojected, right? I remember this, maybe this is off topic, but I remember that movie Tree of Life some years ago by Terrence Malick, and Brad Pitt had this great set piece in there in the family, and he wants to make a son tough. And there's this scene where Brad Pitt, to a kid who's probably 12 or 13, and he's like, "Hit me, son, hit me." And the son is like the mortified kid on the field they're talking about, like, what does he want me to do? And he's like, Brad Pitt then defends himself to his wife, he's like, "I just want to be his own man. I just want to be his own man," which I totally got. I grew up in the 70s. I mean, that is not, it's still there to be your own man. And yet there's different ways to be your own man, but that was all about power and force and being the loudest and winning. And so I don't know what the psychology is behind that particular guy, but you can guess it's a pattern.
Power is so different in the street soccer court. It's so different. You walk up to a street soccer pitch in a neighborhood and you ask anybody, the 8-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 17-year-old, the 40-year-old, who's the best baller? And you're going to get a few of them that are feeling pretty good about themselves and say, "I am." But for the most part, the community knows, and they respect, and they all elevate around those players, and they all play with them. And the best players play with anybody, right? They don't look down their noses at players who aren't as good. In fact, sometimes they show even more respect for the players that are out there trying. One of the street soccer pitches, there was a group of young 20-year-olds, and this 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid used to show up every single afternoon to play with them. And they invited him in. His name was Archie. And they had like these great nicknames for him. And all they're doing is cheering this kid on and encouraging him. And they're tough on him. They were not being easy on him at all. You don't think this kid was learning a lifetime of skill, social skill? Forget the soccer skill. His soccer started to go off the charts. But the social skills. And how about the young 20-year-olds?
Yeah.
How about what they were gaining in being that way to this kid and embracing him that way? I say we lost that. It's sometimes I wonder whether or not we ever had it.
Yeah.
But we certainly need it.
Yeah, the street soccer, the pickup, whatever you want to call it, it allows you to be seen, first of all, and then not just seen at a certain point, appreciated or valued, which is what they were doing with that kid.
Huge. That's the number one thing we hear from urban centers, from the most at risk, the most underserved, the most troubled, hurting neighborhoods. We hear it time and time again. They don't feel heard. They don't feel seen. They don't feel appreciated. And when one person from one of those types of parks that was completely underutilized, after we dropped a few pitches, they came up to John and I and said, something you need to understand, that when we see something like this, we assume it's not for us. Then they came out and they played, and the kids were playing with us, and and we had a group of 40 adults come that play at other locations in the city, and they came specifically over to this park to check out the street soccer pitches, and they're playing with the kids. And it's creating incredible opportunities for personal and emotional growth on everybody's part. And I don't see that happening in any youth sport these days, the way that we have sort of bastardized them. And especially in soccer, where we've taken the soul, to the extent the U.S. ever had it. I don't think they did, but we've taken what's known as the soul of the game out of it. And that's why I don't think we see, to your point, who that person really is, the way we see who that person really is when we're watching a lot of European or South American or other foreign-born players. So we can go on for hours, and I'm still waiting for my Sazerac. But let's wrap up a little bit to the extent we can. There's no way we wrap this up, and you're going to come back. You have to come back, because we have to keep talking about this. It's an important conversation to have, both in terms of the sport, the culture, and our society, and recognizing that street soccer, pickup, 3-touch, as much as we don't like where 3 touches gone to 1 touch or 17 touch, it still does that. It still brings the connectivity, the relationships that we're talking about. So, and your book is filled with great anecdotal stories. I wish we could cover so many of them, even down to how to make your own soccer ball, which is the coolest thing. Love it. The book, again, Football by Mark Yakich, Object Lessons. You get it on Amazon. But if there's a couple of specific takeaways that you would, set out to have your readers take from the book after reading it, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think towards the end of the book, I say this in a couple of different ways, but one of the things, and Rodolfo said this at a certain point when he was reflecting on the game, because he actually wrote something up for me, because I was like, can you just put things down? And of course, once you start writing things down, you more clearly understand what you're thinking about it. He wrote something to the effect of, well, it's not that soccer gives me or us meaning, it's that we give soccer meaning. So you can take that in various ways, but I think one of the things that's important is be careful of what you see in soccer, what you want to see. This goes for lots of things, right? I mean, Thoreau, right? Henry David Thoreau and his trees up in Massachusetts and Concord. I never was a big Thoreau fan until I actually started looking at his journals, not his essays and the famous Walden Pond, but I looked at his journals. 2 million words over 20 years. He just kept a journal. All the man did was walk around. He was a surveyor and wrote a journal. And he came back to this point and again, and like, you see what you want to see, or people see what they want to see. So he has this one line about how, I have this in the book actually, because it's so striking to me. He hears about this man who's died in a river. And he says, what a terrible or a serious injury done to a stream. This dead body. And that seems like a callous way of looking at like someone who's dead in the stream, but it's in a way very basic, and a body would kind of pollute a stream, and it doesn't think about the man's children or wife or brothers and sisters or whatever, but is another way of looking at it. So you see what you want to see. So in soccer, if you want to see a winning type of culture, you can find that. You can look in the European leagues and see Bayern and all the money that the Gulf states have put into the Premier League, and you can see what you want to see. You can see some a certain kind of beauty there, and the crosses that come over and the headers and all kinds of things. But there's other things you can see in it too, right? You can see some of the things we've been talking about. A certain connection with people, a certain appreciation, a certain diversity, a certain grounds up approach to the game. At the end of the book, I left reader with the notion of like, the next time you go out to your son's or daughter's game on a Saturday morning, or you're watching the World Cup, be self-conscious of what's going on. Be self-conscious of the ads you see strung along the side of the Premier League for Gazprom or for whatever it is, Rwanda. Well, what is the story of Rwanda in soccer? There's a great This Is Football series where the first episode is about Rwanda and how soccer very much helped heal that country after the war. So there are ways in which soccer can be co-opted, of course, ways in which it can be weaponized. You can see that Argentina 1978. I want to go back and look at that history lesson of the World Cup alongside the government and the junta disappearing people right there next to each other in Buenos Aires. So I think it's important to look closely and to read closely the game and be careful of what you want to take from it.
Well, can't end on a better note than that, even though we have so much more to say. This is Mark Yakich, who's the Gregory Curtin Distinguished Professor of English and Poetry at Loyola University, New Orleans. I'm very happy and grateful to say he's also a good friend. I'm less happy and grateful to say that I love defending him on the soccer pitch. He's a hell of a baller. Mark, thank you so much. Your insight is fabulous, and look forward to many more conversations and hopefully over some Sazeracs real soon here.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
We at Metal Sports would like to thank Mark Yakich for joining us on this podcast. Mark is the author of the wonderful book simply titled Football. It's available on Amazon. Special thanks to all our listeners. We really appreciate your comments. Our next episode, we'll be bringing you an interesting and provocative conversation with Skip Gilbert, the CEO of U.S. Youth Soccer. Stay tuned for that one, and until then, play on.